Madfinger Games has come out with a new update for Gray Zone Warfare, and in the early days of Gray Zone Warfare, I distinctly remember having a blast, at least for a little while. See, the way that Gray Zone worked was you got on this little bird helicopter and then you flew across the jungle, blasting Fortunate Son or whatever other Vietnam era track that you wanted to, and there was a ton of content that got generated solely around that aspect of it alone. Honestly, the way that the game loop worked was really cool on paper, but ended up falling on its face in practice after, I don't know, 12, 15, maybe 20 hours of gameplay. And originally, Gray Zone Warfare was marketed as an extraction game, which is what attracted people like me to it in the first place. An always persistent, extremely large 42-kilometer square map where the extractions aren't extractions, they're helicopter rides out of a landing zone back to your base camp, where everyone else is still running and moving around while you're sitting at base camp trying to offload your gear and get new gear so that you can go back for your next mission. Seemed like a really cool idea. It was an interesting take on the extraction genre, but Gray Zone Warfare isn't an extraction game anymore, and I mean that in the best way possible. Oh, hey, by the way, if you like this video, maybe consider subbing the channel so that way you could see more of my videos when they go up. Thanks a lot. Appreciate you guys. See, early Gray Zone Warfare had problems. You would end up in this never-ending, really awkward and slow, tedious cycle of obtain mission, take off, go to landing zone, do mission, if you could, assuming that you didn't run into PvP, then hop back on the chopper, fly all the way back to base camp, drop that stuff off, hand in whatever missions you were supposed to hand in, talk to your trade vendors, grab new missions, fly back out again. And at first, for the first 10 or 15 hours of the game, this really wasn't that big of a deal because you were operating inside of a city that was relatively close to your starting area. But once it got to the point where you ended up having a chopper ride that was going to be 7 minutes in length because you had to get to the other side of the map, if only then to end up in a PvP battle with someone, lose, end up back at your base camp, have to re-kit up, fly another 7 minutes all the way back to that same spot just to get camped out again and killed, that was not any fun. It started to bring back memories of the 15 minutes in between raids that you would have for Escape from Tarkov because of the long queue times and how long it took to re-kit yourself. Combine this with there being 3 separate factions on the map at any one given time, but no one ever felt like they were part of the faction. What the hell was the point of having a faction if there wasn't any faction-related goals? Really, this just turns into solo gameplay with extra steps. Needless to say, the folks over at Madfinger Games had their work cut out for them. There were things that they needed to fix. There was an interim patch where they added a day-night cycle that was pretty cool, but really, the gameplay itself was what needed help. But this patch in particular, this 0.3 patch, changed an awful lot. There are still problems, but this is a massive step in the right direction. The idea of having to return back to base camp all the time no longer exists because of these control points. On the map, there are these little triangle icons, some of which have a single dot, which are kind of smaller bases, and some of which have 3, which are larger bases. All of these forward operating positions work as jumping off points, and they also work as places of contention for factions that want to take them over. If the triangle is blue, you own it. If the triangle is red, you don't. At any given point, you have the ability to go take over that red triangle by killing all of the NPCs and then using the laptop that's there to then own the point. In doing so, you spawn a group of your own NPC soldiers to guard the area. This comes with several very key benefits. The first being that you can interact with all of the NPC vendors that are typically only found at your home base. So now if you want to re-kit, you don't have to go back to home base at all. The second is a respawn point. If you die, you have the ability to spawn at that forward operating position, allowing you to be able to get back to your body that much faster. The third is it offers you the ability for a safe log out position. So instead of having to ride all the way across the map in a helicopter to get back to your home base to log out, you can log out at any one of these forward operating spots instead. Also, not only do you have the ability to interact with vendors and buy stuff, but you also have the ability to hand in quest items. If you had to go get a piece of intelligence, for instance, that required you to hand it in to someone, you can do that hand in at these forward operating bases instead. And lastly, you have full stash access. So if you have ammo stocked away, or you want to swap out guns, add a suppressor, whatever, get a new backpack, or drop off a bunch of valuables into your stash, you have full and complete access to your stash and all of its stuff. Now, if the point is under attack, you don't have the ability to access any of these things, but assuming that there is a lull in the action, you are good to go. The second major QOL change that they added is the ability to hand in a bunch of quests, or at least have the conversation about advancing quest chains by making radio calls into the base instead of having to go all the way back to have those conversations. If you have a quest chain that you're doing, for instance, where you have to like mark a body and there's a follow-up quest that happens after that to go further into the base that you are working inside of, the person that you are working with on the trader side of things will talk to you about that quest over the radio and allow you to advance, accept, and do whatever those quests are, as long as they don't require an item from the base. In layman's terms, unless there's an item that you have to hand in to a vendor, or in the case of the extremely rare circumstance, and by extremely rare I mean twice in 20 hours worth of gameplay time where you actually have to fly back to base camp to pick up an item off of the command tent table, you can hand in and accept missions on the fly from wherever you are on the map. This completely modifies what Gray Zone Warfare is as a video game. It is no longer an extraction game because, quite honestly, you never really extract. It's more of a persistent world now. It's more like adventuring in the jungle and doing more survival-related stuff a la DayZ. Now, I am going to talk about some issues that the game has right now, because there are some, and I'll go through what they are. But I don't want to let this list of issues deter you. If you are somebody that decided that you were going to try this game out, had given it a shot before, I would go back and give it a shot. The whole game wiped, everybody started over. It's actually really, really good now, man. Okay, but let's talk about the issues. The first is typically what you see from graphical renderings with a game like this that is still in its alpha stages of development when it comes to optimization. The game still isn't really well optimized. It's better than what it was by quite a bit. I'm getting an average of an extra like 50 or 60 FPS now versus what I got when the game first launched, but they do use UE5 and Lumen has problems. With the day-night cycle and the fact that it's a jungle and the jungle has a lot of humidity, they're trying to mimic that humidity. So there are things like fogginess that happens on glass optics, especially scopes. And that causes for some really funky visuals when you're trying to look at targets and there's a light source in between you and them. The glare feels like it ends up misplaced. Instead of the glare from the light source being in front of the optic, it's almost like the light source is between your face and the optic, and the glare ends up on the lens on the side of your eye. It's really weird. Also, the fogginess in the map in the game has something to do with the level of global illumination in those settings. The volumetric lighting and how it's playing with the fog in general in the game is something that doesn't feel right. And if you are playing on the PvP mode in this game, most everyone, and I would recommend this to you even, because everyone else with a competitive edge is going to do this, you want to turn global illumination down to low. Not only does it fix issues with the fog, but there's also some light bloom effects that happen on red dots that make them very blurry. For the red dot, that's not a sharp light source inside of a lot of those reflex optics. And even more so, scopes like the Voodoo don't end up having reticles that look brown. This is obviously a pass that needs to get made from the development side in order to fix this problem. Mechanically, there's also an issue, a pretty major one, but it's really just on the PvP side of things. You don't experience this on PvE. If you get into a PvP fight and you die, you can respawn at one of these forward operating positions as long as you own it. And I should also make mention here that anytime that there is a PvP conflict, or if any of your faction members, NPCs or otherwise, are attacked by someone from an opposing faction, there's this big red circle that pops up on the map to let somebody, anyone, everyone know that there is a PvP conflict in that area, which is very nice for providing people with a place. If they want PvP, they can go and find it. But let's say you're on a mission and you end up in a PvP fight and you win. You knock out the other guys, you start looting their stuff. If they own a control point nearby, those players can then respawn at that control point and then run right back in. And unfortunately, this creates for a relatively endless back and forth PvP scenario where the losers just run back to try and get their corpse and really mess with the other guys as long as they know relatively where that's going on. And depending on how much gear or how perseverant people are, these PvP conflicts just in those one little areas can last anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours. Just depends on how long people want to go at it until somebody gives up. And part of the issue is that there's no real breathing room in between. You get maybe 2 minutes, and then you have people that are just on top of you again. And it's almost always the same people that you were just done fighting. This wouldn't necessarily be a big problem, except in some cases, depending on how hurt you get, it can take several minutes, sometimes 5 minutes, just to repair all of the damage that's been done to you given how the medical system in this game works. So on that side of things, that needs to get slowed down just a little bit. Also, from another PvP mechanics standpoint, there is an awful lot of like weird bunny hopping kind of stuff that's going on. It reminds me a little bit of like how BattleBit was played at a meta level. See, there are stims in the game now where if you take one of them, for instance, it allows you to have unlimited leg stamina, so you can kind of run and jump as much as you want during the duration of the stim, but you have a ton of arm shake. But from a CQB perspective, if you're trying to rush somebody down, if you have one of those stims running, you can kind of run and jump to your heart's content and then try to point fire the person that you are fighting. Because when you're point firing, arm shake doesn't really bother you nearly as much. This turned into, or has turned into, a whole bunch of sprint and jump spam from people that kind of needs to get curbed a little bit. Not necessarily because I'm saying that movement meta is bad, but just because given all of the other aspects of this game and how they've tried to portray it as a somewhat military simulator, the idea of being able to bee-hop everywhere cannot be something that the devs intend. Also, there still is the long tried and true issue going back probably a year now where the NPCs in the game seem like they're relatively lethal inside of about, 70 meters or so. Maybe not so much in the starting areas, but once you get around like Fort Nerith and stuff, kind of like the tier 3 mobs, those guys are a bit more lethal, but they don't really have very long engagement ranges. And given by the point in time where you've gotten missions to kind of take you to that point, you've gotten several 30mm scopes to choose from, you can kind of just lay back at about 100, maybe 125 meters, don't even have to re-zero anything. You can use a 5.56 rifle. I just used a Daniel Defense M4 on single tap and kind of just took my time sniping them all from 150 meters and never really had to worry about any return fire to speak of whatsoever. It kind of just rewarded you for not going in guns blazing and just taking your time to snipe them out. And as much as I love sniping, it would have been nice to have somebody at least at like 200, maybe 250 meters on top of any of these buildings with a Mosin trying to do the counter-sniping deal. But all that being said, overall, this has been a massive improvement over what the game was a year ago. I've spent about like 25, 30 hours in just the last 4 days or so playing right away, and I have had a ton of fun, even just playing solo. The quality of life improvements speeding up the game loop the way that it has modified this game substantially. It is so much more fun now. Anyway, guys, that's what I have for this one. Thanks so much for coming and checking it out. If you'd be so kind as to sub the channel, that would be amazing. Otherwise, you can check me out over at twitch.tv/Onepeg, where I am live, every single day around 6 or 7 a.m. Eastern. And if neither of those work for you, then perhaps I will see you in the next video. Thanks so much for lending me your eyeballs, everyone. We'll see you real soon.